HiFi Sean, Sean Dickson. Welcome. Enjoy your cup of tea there. What sort of creative atmosphere were you brought up in as a very young child?
Wow, that's a question. There isn't actually anybody in my close family that had anything whatsoever to do with music or arts. All I can remember as a small child is in my local town where I came from, Bells Hill. The record shop was actually a barber's. So ever from like, as soon as your hair starts growing at 2 or 3, you're taken to this record shop up these stairs to get your hair cut. So I always walked through this record shop all the time. So I think that's where my fascination from music came from, seeing people, buy these 7-inch records and hearing music all the time. And whilst you're waiting to go up to the barbers, I would, flick through records. I mean, my first actual album was a Burt Bacharach album at the age of 4, because my dad said, I bought it for you because you liked the texture of the cover. Because I've still got it. It's got a kind of fake leather cover. And he said, you like the texture of it. But I mean, that album means so much for me because it completely embedded in me string arrangements, which I suppose I've used immensely over the years. So yeah, but a short answer to your question is, I mean, I've thought about this before. The only kind of connection I have, and it's funny because a lot of the other bands and musicians from Bells Hill, like my friends Douglas and Norman, etc., we all associate with 2 things. We associate with that barber shop, and on the main street there was a Woolworths, and then Woolworths, that's where my fascination from Omnichords came, because they had a stall and then, like in the 80s for this electronic keyboard. So, yeah.
But did your parents actually listen to music at home?
Yeah, God, yeah. They bought records. My mum told me I'd destroyed her Elvis collection on the back step with sticks and stones. Because I think it was more of a fascination of sound for me. When I was at a young age, it was just like, how does this thing make music? So she said I would watch her play records. They used to have like a was it called a radiogram, the big unit in the living room. And I used to watch, the records fall down and the thing going and playing, and the next record fall down. And then she said behind my back, you would steal them and go out on the back step in the garden with a stick, and you'd spin the record round and try and play it with a stone. So I ended up destroying her Heartbreak Hotel 10-inch. And there was another, I think there was a Beatles 7-inch that was quite early on and rare. And she said that they had to end up hiding records from me because I kept, as a kid, going out playing them in the garden. And then to stop that, this is a cool thing, to stop that, they actually bought me a record player when I was 5 for my Christmas. They bought me, I still remember it, it was a Alba. Remember Alba? ALBA. It was an Alba dance set that was like fake teak that sat in my bedroom, and every time I went to get my hair cut, they'd buy me a record.
So what was the first record you bought for yourself?
Myself, that's a hard one, because I always remember, the weird thing is I have lots of records from a very young age that were bought for me. But it was kind of my choice. So I would say the first one that I actually went, can I have that record? Because I heard it, was because my aunt, I had this aunt who was really trendy. She was into glam rock and, she was into T-Rex and all that kind of stuff. She was mega cool. I used to go up as a kid to her bedroom and just be like lost in all this amazing music. So she had a copy of Sugar Sugar by the Archers, which I totally love. And that was my first 7-inch record. And the funny thing is, my copy has my name wrote on it really badly for when I took it to the school Christmas disco, and used to hand records to people to play. So it has like property of Sean Dickson wrote on it.
You weren't going to lose that one. I remember having my own record player in my bedroom, and my musical tastes changing from my parents, and I'm a different generation to you, so my big hero right straight away was Bowie, like many people of my generation. But Bowie represented more than music to me. He represented the place in which I wanted to go, where I felt I belonged. Which artists represented that for you, and in what way?
That's an easy answer. Mark Bolan, T-Rex. That was the first time that I completely fell in love with everything to do with somebody. Obviously, because of my age, I discovered it a bit later on, but I would say it was my first kind of teenage thing where I went out and basically bought everything that T-Rex ever made, or get my mum and dad to buy them when I went for a haircut. But I remember actually they were quite happy, because they were, that thing where your parents kind of go, oh, I want this record, I want that record, and they were like, oh yeah, that's cool, get it on. We like Get It On. So yeah, I think Get It.
I'm sorry, Get It
No,
On.
I was going to say, I think Get It On is. It's that funny thing when people ask you what's your favourite record, and I always associate to Get It On, because it's the one record that's always been there all through my life. That every time I hear it, I still get a rush. It comes on in the car, and you're just like, what an amazing record. And Mark Bolan.
I mean, The Outsider has played a big role in popular music. I mean, like as I mentioned, Bowie, the Bowie Outsider in terms of Bowie's career was a huge thing. And I think many creative people feel as children a little bit like outsiders in their environment. Did you have that, and how did that make you feel, and what do you think that actually may have given you?
I mean, I was on a street where I lived in my home, and there was these kind of like, how to put it nicely, there were just these bullies that lived on the street. So I was always bullied as a child, for certain things, and locking myself away to music was my escape. It was my where I did feel like an outsider. And it wasn't until I started meeting other outsiders in my small town, and we became a more powerful team of outsiders, that meant that all these other people couldn't infiltrate what we were doing. So there was a definite team of outsiders that it was before social media. I tell this story all the time. I mean, I'm sure you associate it with it. You discovered other people by the way they dressed, or the way they held themselves, or the way they looked, or whatever. Like Norman out the Teenage Fan Club lived round the corner from me, but I didn't know him. But one day I saw him walking down the street with a pair of tartan trousers on, and I kind of thought, right, okay, he's into the same kind of stuff as me. And he said, I used to see you walk by my house to go to guitar lessons, and he used to think the same. And then eventually we, at the age of 15, 16, we clicked. And then his friend was Douglas out the BMX Bandits. So, and then it all just started from there. We started putting parties on at the local hotel. So we built this kind of thing that brought all these other outsiders that we never knew about into, because as soon as they started seeing in this small town that there was other people that were into the same kind of music, because you don't know, before social media, you didn't know what people were doing in their bedrooms. That sounds saucy, but you know what I mean? But you don't know what people's, you didn't know if there was other people out there that were listening to those records that you were listening to. But as soon as you meet somebody that was like, oh yeah, that's an amazing record. I spent half my teenage years sitting around people's bedrooms playing each other records. You would literally take piles of records to each other's houses and play all your new records or ones you love, and have big discussions about them. And it's, I'm so lucky. I mean, I talk about this a lot with those guys as well. And there's even been a movie made about it, with the scene in Bellshill and the scene in Glasgow and all this. How they associate with each other. But we're so lucky that we met. When I think about that, like how different our lives would have been if we hadn't crossed paths, because we gave each other confidence in what we were doing. to do what we wanted to do, even though even though we did quite different things from each other. We were still under the same umbrella, but we were all doing different things. But we were all kind of accepting that that's brilliant what you do, and that's brilliant what you do. So yeah, we were really, really lucky that our paths all crossed.
You also grew up in an era where the musical styles were changing rapidly. You know, at that point, there weren't necessarily a mix of musical styles, but it would go from one to the other. We'd go from glam, punk would come along, new wave or electro would come along, and so on. And it would be sort of different phases which you would get into. When you look back at that, how important do you think that has been to your development as an artist and what you are able to look back on and feed on today?
I mean, I was always, I loved it when punk was big, and then this whole kind of dub reggae stuff came from that as well. Which huge influence on me. The way those records sound and the way those records were produced, etc. And I've always had a very open mind to, because everybody I knew, like everybody in Bellshill had a copy of Saturday Night Fever and a copy of Never Mind the Bollocks. It didn't make, you've seen punks, going round to their house and they're playing like Night Fever by the Bee Gees, and you're just like, this doesn't make sense, but it makes tons of sense. So it just, from that early age, I just realised that there's kind of no genres. It's just what you like and what you don't like, and you should never. One of my most hated terms is guilty pleasure. I can't stand that term. I think it's actually quite abusive towards music. There's no way you should feel guilty about whatever pleasure you have within art. So I think, from a kind of teenage age, I kind of realised it was like, well, if they can like that and they're not supposed to like that, well, that's what I'm going to be like. I'm just going to go through life and even as a songwriter or producer or music maker, just have that concept of I really shouldn't create, barriers to what I'm supposed to. I find a lot of other musicians a bit too scared to move from the barriers sometimes. And that might be a downfall for me, because I've been told, especially in the days of the Soot Dragons, I was told we were quite hard to market because we were kind of moving faster than we were developing. Because when we started, we were like, I was like 17. And the way we sounded was it was the only way we could sound, because that was the ability we had at playing instruments and making records. We had no concept of production. We had no concept of what you do. We were just like young guys thrashing it out and, wanting to be loud, fast and exciting. And as time goes on, your skills develop, you start learning more about sound and production and how things go together. And that's when I think, especially for me as a songwriter, I was kind of writing faster than the band was developing in a way. What was going on in my head was like 10 steps away from what I was doing. So that's why that period of about 1988 to 1990, there's this huge curve of where the band started. I would say the band changed. I hate that when people say that. I think what happened is, you could quite easily say that about the Beatles. It was like the Beatles sounded kind of like the Beatles, and then suddenly Sgt. Pepper's changed that curve. So we were kind of the same. It was technology that changed that curve. Suddenly in 1988, you could afford a sampler. You could afford a drum machine. You could afford all this. Up to then, it was all Fairlights that sampled it, which were like 10, 20,000 pounds. But suddenly technology was available to make what was going on in your head. And that was a huge curve that changed everything for me.
I mean, you talked there about technology and how it changed things, but I also wonder, as a very young man at 17, you're also getting other cultural interests at that period in your life that maybe you didn't have before, and wider cultural interests than even music. So what were your wider cultural interests at that time, or did they come really later?
I mean, I've always been slightly obsessed with the kind of more left field B movie type thing. I used to have like a huge VHS collection of Henry Henlotter movies and Ross Meyer and you know, very early on, I got into John Waters through a friend in Bellshill, and it just exploded in my mind. So I just managed to try and get I'd go around to all these really dodgy video shops in Glasgow and try and find all these kind of like crazy, you know, B movies. And I think all of us that were hanging about together were in that kind of obsession as well. So artistically, that exploded my mind because I was looking at from all this stuff from Europe and America, which always had really good music in it as well. So, you know, that's the imagery. If you actually look at some of the imagery of the Soup Dragons as it went on, you can start seeing that infiltrating, you know, into how we were making music videos and record covers, etc. Ross, the drummer out of the Soup Dragons, he was at art school, and then when he joined the band, he kind of took a few years out of art school, but he did all the artwork for the band right up to the point, and then he decided he wanted to leave and go back to art school. So we were without a drummer for, you know, a few years, and that's when I started, you know, thinking, right, either we get a drummer or we use this, you know, we use this opportunity to try and make that stuff that's going on in my head, but I don't exactly know how to make it, but we might as well have a good kind of a go at trying to do it and see what happens. But artistically outside that as well, yeah, I mean, problem with me is like I'm colorblind. I'm as colorblind as a person can be, supposedly. And from a very young age at school, and art was always a problem with me, not because of myself, but because of my teachers, because in the 80s, you're made to believe that there's something wrong with you and you're colorblind. You know, you're brought into a room and they give you a list. I was brought into a room when I was age 11, and I was given this long list of everything I could not be. You know, I couldn't be a doctor, I couldn't fly a plane, I could do this, couldn't do that. So it was just abusive all the time. Like, you can't see things right. You're wrong, you know. And especially with art, I remember getting an E at art when I was at high school, basically because the sky was purple in this painting that I'd done. And as a young guy, you think, oh God, but that's wrong, and I'm wrong. Whereas as you get older, you realise actually that's cooler. The fact that I kind of like, but you know, yeah, I had a teacher who was just basically telling me I was wrong and I couldn't do anything. So I think that made me grow up a bit, you know, separated from that side of the art world, which made me get deeper into the side of the art world that I knew I could excel in, I suppose, you know.
I mean, I presume at that early point, I mean, you're talking somewhat a bit later as well. We've moved a little bit, but at that early point, let's say when you were 17, you were still living at home.
Yes.
And, you know, and I imagine, and I don't know for sure, but you know, my parents had put no value on a creative life when I was young. It was the thing. It was the thing you shouldn't do, in a sense.
Yeah.
How were your parents about that, and how did that sort of influence you?
It was really funny because at school I was quite academic until I got to the age of 16. And I just kind of threw it all out the window. And they started blaming it on people I was hanging about with, you know, because basically it was all just about music for me. And there was a period where my dad was like a football manager for a team. And I was always surrounded by football players watching football in our house. And I really don't like football. And I have no interest in football whatsoever. So I used to kind of go up to my bedroom and play, you know, there was a period where I was obsessed with Mute records. So I was like blasting Fad Gadget records at full blast from my bedroom and things, just as a kind of thing. And I think my mum and my parents, they kind of never took it serious until we released a flexi disc on a fanzine, which cost us £20 to record the track. We put it on this fanzine, and it got a single of the week in the NME, which they've never had a clue what the NME was, so that didn't impress them. But what impressed them was one day I'm sitting in my bedroom, and the BBC phoned, and it was John Peel's office, and my mum's like, John Peel's on the phone for you? And I'm like, what? And I ran down, and it was his producer asking if he would do a John Peel session. So as soon as the words BBC were involved, you know, that's when they were like, oh. You know, that's when they started telling my aunts and uncles, yeah, Sean's going to be on the BBC. You know, so it's like, yeah, that changed things quite dramatically. And it was kind of nice though, because I think in a way the Soup Dragons, and then they started seeing me being connected to the BMX Bandits, and you know, and it was that kind of intertwining thing from our little town. People, you know, producers in the BBC are really good. You know, they want to investigate and all this, and all of a sudden, Glasgow had this kind of up and coming new scene going where there was, you know, the Jesus and Mary chain and the early Primal Scream, the shop assistants. Before then, there was the pastels, you know. So it was suddenly Glasgow was this hodgepodge of Indium, and my mum and dad were that's kind of when they let the strings go. You know, I was no longer meant to be an accountant or something serious. It was just like, well, there's obviously something happening here. So, and then, yeah, I kind of, you know, we started releasing actual records, and I think that kind of really impressed them. Even though I was still staying at home, and she was moaning about the fact that I was, you know, I wasn't paying any kind of like upkeep or anything. But I think back to it, they were really good in that respect. But I left home quite early. I mean, I think I left home when I was 19.
Just staying in Glasgow a second, because I always found Glasgow a sort of city of contradictions. And I remember going there, and people were incredibly friendly, and there seemed to be an incredible amount going on, and it was very rough. And I remember going to a gay club, and there was a fight in a gay. I was completely impressed because I'd never seen a fight in a gay club. That had to be.
I actually bet I know what gay club it was. It was Bennett's.
I can't remember. I really can't remember. But I think there was only one gay club, so it must have been that.
Yeah, there will be that. So I don't think it's there anymore. Yeah, but,
yeah, no, it's very impressive.
Glasgow's very. See, think about Glasgow. I mean, I get this a lot living in London, where people think you're being confrontational about the way you speak. But the way I say it, I mean, obviously the accent doesn't help, because people associate that kind of Glaswegian, you know, slightly in your face kind of person. But the confrontation comes from passion. You know, a lot of in Glasgow, there's a hell of a lot of passion to do with music and obviously football and all that kind of stuff. The only problem with when I was growing up, there was 2 football teams, and you'd be asked straight away, do you support Rangers or Celtic? And the only reason somebody would ask you that was to work out what religion you were. You know, because I went to a Catholic school, you know, and why I went to Catholic school, I don't know, because I've never ever followed anything to do with Catholic religion. But, you know, there was basically Catholic schools and Protestant schools. And, you know, there was 2 teams, Glasgow Celtic, Glasgow Rangers. It's still the same. I get asked, even to this age, I still get asked when you hear a Glasgow accent, who do you support, Celtic or Rangers? And you're like, it just fascinates me that still goes on, you know, that kind of segregation to do with religion, to do with sport. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Catholic, as in exactly the same as you, brought up a Roman Catholic, and I think the Catholic guilt played a role in my life. I may come to that a bit later.
Totally, yeah.
In terms of John Waters, I mean, I'm a huge fan of John Waters, got, you know, all those movies. And I think basically, and this may be something which connects us as well, I was obsessed with Divine.
Okay.
Was she an obsession for you?
Well, I wrote a song called Divine Thing.
No, I know.
and to be honest, the video, which was made in 91 in New York, downtown New York, by a guy called Nick Egan, who I loved the video for Buffalo Girls by Malcolm McLaren, because it was very New York, and it was very, you know, what you call guerrilla shooting, where you just go out and film stuff. So Nick had that idea, because I said to Nick, I want to make a video that looks, you know, I just love that taxi driver feel of New York. Can we make a video that looks like that? And he done an amazing job. But John Waters loved it, and when we played in Baltimore, he gave me a can of hairspray signed, which I still have. Pride of place, my can of hairspray from John Waters. And then there was talk of him making the next video, which was a song called Pleasure. in America, because Divine Thing was very successful and like on MTV and all that in America. And he was really up for doing pleasure, and we were like blown away. I mean, I spoke to his people and all this about ideas we had. We wanted to do it, and there was a place in California that I knew he would love, which is a place called the Madonna Inn, which is basically a hotel made up of people's pleasures. And it's from the 50s, 40s, 50s. So it's got that kind of like retro kind of weird romanticism, but it's also pretty messed up. And he loved the idea, and we're talking and all this. And then I think must have been around the time I think it was Serial Mum. It was roughly about the same time. And as you know, that became really successful. So sadly, it never happened. But we did keep in contact, because moving forward, when I done the video for Testify with Crystal Waters lives in Baltimore, just outside Baltimore, and she did her bit in Baltimore. I did my bit in Glasgow, London, and I wanted to get John Waters to be a preacher in the video. So I still had the contact details, and I messaged them thinking they would come back, and they came back. And they were just like, sorry, we're really busy at the moment, all this, but we love the track. And, you know, they were like super nice. I've had lots of weird contacts regarding that. I done Soft Cell about 4 or 5 years ago, asked me to remix 2 of their tracks. One of them, Dave Ball said to me, choose what 2 tracks you'd want to remix. And one of them was a track called Soul. I don't know if you know that, Soft Cell Soul. It's the B-side of What. And Dave goes, I don't know where the tapes are, but we're going to try and find them. So he went on to this kind of like 3-month thing of trying to work out, because the tapes in London, the studio closed down, but then he worked out that the person that owned that studio moved to Baltimore. And they actually found the tapes of Soul in the basement of a house in Baltimore that was on the same street that Divine lived on.
Oh, wow.
It's
a weird connection. I mean, I remember, you know, I'm old enough that I saw Divine live once in, I think, around 1982, 83, when it was all shoot your shot.
Yeah,
and
this is when
like
she done the Hacienda around.
Yeah, that must have been the same time, and she did this gay club Bolts in London, and yeah, that was that was a performance and a half. I mean, it was so in your face. It was. I think
the classic one was the Tube. I mean, that was the one that turned everybody on to Divine. I mean, like when she walked down those stairs singing "Shake It Up," it was just like everybody I knew was just like that. The next day, it was, because that was a Friday, wasn't it? So it was the next day on a Saturday. You were out with your friends at gigs or clubs. It was just, everybody was Divine. And once again, you know, those records weren't meant to be for punks. They weren't meant to be for like indie kids, but it's just like everybody loved them. And that was just a great, like I was saying earlier, it was just that kind of scene that we revolved in had nothing to do with like you had to like this kind of music. It was just like you liked any kind of music. And that was the weird thing about young indie guitar bands back there. I think the music papers thought we were all very insular, and that's all we listened to. We didn't, you know, we had record collections that were all over the place.
Yeah, it was also Bobby O produced, wasn't it? Bobby Orlando, which was, you know, a phenomenal person in terms of the development of music in the 80s.
Yes.
How important was, you know, obviously Divine as an image and a character and a human being, and that power, but also the music had an incredible driving power. How important was it for you to sort of be able to listen to that type of music and appreciate that type of music in your career?
You'll Shake It Up, and it kind of came out around the same time as New Order were doing Blue Monday and all this. So it was, you all kind of felt like, you know, it's obviously, you know, Blue Monday had a definite association with that kind of high energy gay club scene. But obviously when you're like 17 years old, that doesn't connect, and you just suddenly hear all these records that sound like they come from this futuristic kind of world. And the weird thing was, I mean, I was into synthesizers before I was in a guitar band. So just around the age of like 14, 15, I actually made an album. This is a true story. You'll laugh at this. I made an album in my bedroom with a Roland SH-101 that my mum and dad got me for my Christmas. My friend's drum machine, those double cassette decks. And I worked out how I could double track. I would record the drums and a bass line and then record it while I was playing some keys. So I would like bounce backwards and forwards to the cassettes, layering different tracks. So I made a 12-track album, and I even named the band. I called myself Silent Industry. I made this cassette, and I found it, and there's a cover version of Crow and a Baby by the Human League on it, which is from Travelogue. And I found the cassette a few years ago, and I told somebody about this, and the word got about, and there's actually a record label that are going to release it next year on vinyl. This imaginary band that I made up before I was playing loud feedback guitars in a band, and it's kind of funny because I was really good at programming drum machines when I was 14, 15. I really got into programming drum machines. So when all that Divine and high energy stuff was happening, I just associated it straight with that, Daniel Miller and his Silicon Teens and all the kind of early Mute stuff. I could hear the connection because a lot of that stuff was 4 on the floor and quite dancey. And I mean, as a DJ now, I play a lot of Bobby Orlando. I was actually played on Saturday. It was a club playing, and I played the original.
I'm So Hot For You, not that one.
No.
Oh, I love that.
I played the version of West End Girls, the original Pet Shop Boys one that Bobby Orlando did, which actually has different verses. It's got extra words in it and things. I really like that version.
Yeah, I was completely mad about his own "I'm So Hot For You," which sort of just fascinated me at that time. To talk about, you mentioned Dave Ball and of course Mark Almond, and you've just mentioned the Human League, and of course then the second incarnation of the Human League was Martin Rushent in terms of production. How important was Martin Rushent to you?
Huge. I mean, I wouldn't have made that cassette in my bedroom if it was with Martin Rushent. I didn't know what a dub was. I was like 14, 15. I just saw these, when that Human League Love and Dancing album came out, or, League Unlimited Orchestra, that completely blew my mind. It was my brother who had it, and I stole it from my brother's bedroom, basically, and it stayed in my bedroom until he took it back, and then I'd take it back. But I was completely obsessed with the idea, because I loved Dare. Dare was just this genius pop album. And I even met the Human League in an airport once when I was going on holiday with my family. And my mum's like, "This is the Human League, you love them." And she dragged me over and got my photograph taken with them, and they signed things. I wish I still had that photograph, age 12, of the Human League. But I was kind of obsessed with that album, Dare, and then obviously went backwards and bought Travelogue and started getting into the BEF and Heaven 17 stuff. But then, Love and Dancing just blew my mind. It was just kind of like I'd never heard, and then people never bring this up. Martin Rushent's Altered Images 12 inches were just insane. I mean, literally. John Peel used to play them all the time. Like you'd hear "See Those Eyes," and I think the other one was "Pinky Blue," or I think it's called. And it was just like taking somebody's song and putting it through a food processor where it contains no, just doesn't sound anything like the 7-inch. And that would just, wow. And he was my god for a while. His drum machine I used to be able to program the whole of Dare on a drum machine. I know every drum fill, bum, 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 bum. And I know which side the toms go and everything. I'm completely obsessed with that Love and Dancing.
Oh, wow. You mentioned again John Peel. I mean, I think that's amazing at that age. It's incredible. You mentioned John Peel again, and John Peel became a friend of yours over the years, I understand. Or you had contact with him over the years. What do you feel that, I don't mean in a professional or in a sense from him actually playing your music, but in terms of a human being, what do you feel that you learned from John Peel in your life?
Passion. His passion for music was just And his passion for introducing people to music was the thing that blew me away. It wasn't really about him finding the music. It was about kind of like him finding music to give to you. And that just really, I just thought that was one of the most humble, beautiful things ever. And I always loved how excited he got about things. You know, I mean, I've told this story before, but it was the band after the Soup Dragons, the High Fidelity. Now he had no reason to, like, you know, obviously he was a huge reason the Soup Dragons done so well in the early years. He was a huge fan and all this, but then he stopped playing our records. Kind of what he said to me was, it's the same as like when T-Rex, you know, when your records start going in the charts, I'm not playing them because I don't like them. It's just that every other show's playing them. I've only given 2 hours a night to introduce to people music that they don't hear in all these other shows. So why should I be playing all these stuff that's already getting played all over daytime radio? And I totally understood that. I think it was a lovely thing to say. But he said, I never stopped not liking you. I just didn't, you know, I just didn't play records. But he said with the High Fidelity, he became really invested in the band after the Soup Dragons. He really liked us. And he asked us to do he used to do those, you remember he used to do those Christmas shows, like from Peel Acres, which was Maidavale. And he used to like get bands to do a Christmas song. So the High Fidelity, we done Silent Night, which was kind of the most obvious thing, because he laughed about that. He was, we have the High Fidelity doing the most obvious Christmas song that they could do. But we did it on Omnichords. And he just came up after, and like, he came up live on air. You can actually hear it. He comes up and he's like, what is this? And I'm like, it's an Omnichord. It's this instrument that I'm slightly obsessed by. And he got me to play some bits and all this. And then when we went off air, he came up to me and he went, you should do a whole album of just Omnichord songs. And I was like, really? And he went, yeah. And he goes, yeah, you should do it. And I said, it's your birthday in a few months' time. And he went, yeah. And I went, I'll buy you an Omnichord, but you've got to write a song with me on the Omnichord album if I do a whole Omnichord album. And he went, okay, deal. And he wrote a song about his wife, Pig Might Fly, which is on that album, which is called the Omnichord album, which is actually, there's a poster for it there.
Oh yeah,
wow. The Omnichord album. And he did that. And then the next thing he did was he got us round to his cottage, which was outside, out in the country, outside London. And we did a few sessions, Omnichord sessions from his house, which was wonderful. And the famous story is, and I'm not making this up, next morning around his breakfast table in his country kitchen, the postman came with this huge sack of post and just said, like, hey, John, and just plumped it next to his table. So I'm sitting having a coffee and breakfast, and he starts making, because it was the days of CDs and cassettes, so he's making piles of CDs and cassettes. And I'm like, so it's a piles? And he's like, definitely listen to, nah. And I'm like, I just looked at him, and I remember this day, I always get chills when I talk about this. So I looked him in the eyes and I said, what is it that keeps you doing this? That keeps you going? And he just looked, he kind of stopped, looked up to me and went, the next record I hear might be the best record I've ever heard. And then it was just like, that blew my mind. It was just like, that's, what do you say to that?
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, we've jumped around a bit here, and I want to go to something that we've jumped over eras, we've jumped over the
sorry, that's
period.
me.
But no, that's fine. But I don't need to tell this in that sort of linear way. But one thing that really fascinates me about your life, not necessarily your career, about your life, and it's possibly because I'm a gay man, and so for me this is something that's really amazing. There was a period of your life where you were lost in a way.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. In a kind of nice way, I came out 2001. Which is kind of funny when I always think back now that it was 2001, because all my life I was obsessed with that year. I think maybe it was because of the Stanley Kubrick movie or something, but I was always like, wonder what I'll be doing in 2001. you know, when you're a kid. Oh, I wonder if 2001, if I'll have a spaceship. I wonder in 2000 and no, 2001, I had a complete and utter breakdown, came out as gay, and hated myself, hated what I did to everybody around me.
That was because
Kind,
you were married and you have a
yeah,
child, and
yeah,
that
yeah.
was then was. Do you look back and say that was my Catholic guilt? That's why I sort of mentioned it earlier, because I've always wondered, reading your story,
Um,
whether there was some that feeling of guilt. I mean, if you know, there is a word in German, I can't remember what it is, and it's about when you're older and you come out as gay. They've even got a word for it, so it's not that unusual. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it was the guilt of knowing there was two ways to go. Either I was going to hurt people, or I was going to end up hurting myself. And if I didn't stop, it was going to go either way. So it was like, you know, it was a bit of a self-preservation, and that was kind of selfish. But then that's where all the guilt comes from as well. Yeah, I had to basically kind of start my life in 2001 again, a life that I never knew anything about. Got myself into some horrible situations regarding it, you know, trying to learn my way through obstacles. I lost basically all my friends, not through any fault of theirs. It was more through the fault of mine, of not, you know, I suppose it's that kind of thing when somebody dies, it's an embarrassing thing to reach out to people. So I think it was you know, it was pretty catastrophic, kind of, to suddenly, like, one day everything in your life changes, like everything, you know. I always remember the members that I always laugh at this, the High Fidelity. The other guys were like, when I told them I was getting, oh, thank God, we thought you were a heroin addict for the last year. I was just like, Jesus. Yeah, because I became so withdrawn in myself, locked myself away for a long time, and basically, kind of, if it wasn't, you know, to fast forward many years later, a phone call where I accidentally met the man who's now my husband, I don't know where my life would have went, because I never made a record again for about, you know, like, I mean, like, I'd made things, but I'd never made a proper album. This is my music again for 15 years. You know, it took me that long to, and the DJing thing was just a way of me being involved with music without actually having to make music or be a singer. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, I don't sing anymore, which, you know, I'm working with David McAlmont, which he finds interesting, that I do not want to sing anymore. I think I just don't have any confidence in my being a front person or being somebody who project. I like the idea of being this person on the side. But I suppose my dream of being Martin Russian has happened. You know, I'm just a character that likes making music and doing my thing and kind of controlling that space. Whereas when you're the singer of a band, it can be a bit. It can be a full-time job, basically. And DJing is the great thing about DJing is you're not in a band, you're not dealing with people's problems. It's not like a soap opera every day. So I kind of caught on to that quite when I started DJing. I never thought I would end up being a DJ. Jesus Christ. I just played a bunch of disco records at somebody's party in Glasgow, and somebody heard it and asked me to come again. And then I came again to this party, and then the next minute I'm DJing at Glasgow Art School, and then the next minute myself and my friend are giving a party at Glasgow Art School that ran for 5 years and was every Thursday. I never thought I was going to end up being a full-time DJ. And look at me now. You know, I was in Australia last month DJing, and it just completely blows my mind that I've actually got to that point without having any kind of, you know, because the weird thing about people always say, like, what's the difference between being a DJ and being in a band? I think DJs are quite careerist. It's a bit like they're focused and like, I'm a DJ and I'm going to do this. When you're in a band, you just do it and you just, whatever happens, happens. And I think I'm still like that. So getting to a certain point as a DJ, you just kind of think, when you see your name on a poster, you're a bit like, God, I can't believe I'm actually. I mean, even the name HiFi Sean was wasn't taken that serious. It wasn't like I sat down one day and go, I'm going to be called HiFi Sean. We were starting this club at the art school, and my friend said to me, would have been 99 maybe, and he said to me, you need a DJ name, because I've got a DJ name. And I thought, just put Sean Dickson. And he went, no, it'd be cooler if you have a DJ name. He said, guess what, your email, because nobody had emails then, but because I was in the high fidelity, we were given emails, and they were all HiFi Sean, HiFi Paul, HiFi Adrian, HiFi Ross. So he said to me, use that. That's really cool, that email, because that's really cool. It's really futuristic. So that's how HiFi Sean came about. I just used my email address.
Do you know changing your name changes your personality? That's according to my therapist, because I used to be a presenter on MTV, and my real name's Stephen James. So there's this, and this therapist said to me that the blame created a different character. And
do you think it did?
I think it did, and I think now I'm now like a fusion of the two, which I think is the healthier version. But I just want to get back to that lost period, because I find I had a period of my life where my career completely died, and it was a 10-year period, and I went very introspective. I also went very suicidal and had an awful period. But when I look back upon that period, and I wrote a book called Getting Lost is Part of the Journey, and that just to sort of describe the fact that lost period has become the most important period of my life creatively, where I think I reset my life in a way. And it's now a really healthy thing. So do you feel that period has actually made you, in retrospect?
It's made me a lot more thankful and a lot more aware of things I should be thankful for. And there was a point where I hit rock bottom, and I was suicidal, and ended up in a mental health institute, etc. And that's when you realise it's kind of weird. I've never had that feeling again, obviously, but that feeling of this is the lowest that I could possibly get. I can't go down any more than this. So the only way is up. And I'm not joking, for about a week in this mental health institute, I was singing The Only Way Is Up to myself, which is weird because my manager was Jazz Summers, and Jazz Summers was married to, Yaz. Yes. So I was around when that record was getting made. I remember the whole incarnation of that record and the fact it went straight in at #1. So it was just weird that all these years later, that song just stuck in my head. And for a week, I was just lying in, in a locked room, basically singing The Only Way Is Up to myself. And I convinced the doctor, there was one doctor that I kind of realised was slightly younger and a bit cooler. Everybody else was like aged old professory types. This guy was like, and I said to him, listen, if I tell you that tonight I'm actually supposed to be DJing at my club, and I haven't told my friend who I run it with where I am, nobody knows that I've been in here for a week, and I really want to go and DJ tonight at 8 o'clock. I want to leave this place and go and DJ. Does that not tell you that I'm actually trying to get myself out of all this? And he looked at me and he said, let me get back to you. And he went away for an hour later. He came out, he goes, right, we're going to let you go. And I went straight to the club and DJ'd. And I remember at the end of the night, we always drove my friend back to his house because it was on my way home. So I took the car and I drove, and I told him afterwards, I went, I kind of tried to take my life last week, and I've been locked away in a mental health ward. And he goes, when did you get out? I went, 5 hours ago, 6 hours ago. Do you think you came straight here? I went, yeah. Why not? I'm not going to do that again. It's been a complete learning process about how, it was the best night ever. I remember DJing and had tears in my eyes and all this. It was just realised it was like, what the hell am I doing with my life? This is stupid. I need to not go that way. I need to go that way. So every time that record comes on, it's just like I get chills down my spine.
I want to come obviously to things much more present. And you mentioned David McAlmont. When did you become aware of him as an artist, and what attracted you?
I mean, the obvious answer is when Yes came out. But obviously, I kind of, when he talks about his band beforehand, I'm sure I had heard his band beforehand, but obviously Yes exploded, didn't it? It was just like this massive record, especially here in the UK. And yeah, it was just a beautiful record. It was kind of everything I like I said earlier. You know, I have that very electronic side to me, but also have that very big thing where I love big Bacharach string sections. In fact, me and David went to see Burt Bacharach with my husband 2 years ago. It was funny because it was Gay Pride in London, and I was supposed to be DJing just in Trafalgar Square. But we went to see Burt Bacharach before at the Royal Festival Hall, and we cried all the way through it. Sat there in tears down. I was like, oh my God. And then I looked at my thing and I was like, oh shit, I'm supposed to DJ in half an hour. And they were all like, well, you're staying. And I'm like, well, I can't leave. And it was like, I literally ran across Trafalgar Square at full speed to get to the DJ stage to play. But yeah, anyway, but I'm diversing again. But David, David, I kind of feel like it wasn't just Yes. I mean, I bought that album, but then I followed his path, and then you would see him appearing on Later and things like this, doing the odd. That's the thing I love about David. David doesn't follow the ABCD of being a pop star. He does what he wants to do, and that's what makes
him special. You. Same as you.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I suppose so. But that's what makes, to me, I discovered, this is like, I never knew David as a person until I'd done the FT album, which is obviously a big story as well, because that was just my concept of trying to give myself confidence by having other people involved. So it's a bit like if I write songs and get other people to write them with me, but they sing them, then that issues singing is not going to happen. And I just wrote this list of people that I kind of thought, well, I want to find 12 people on this album that have something completely unique about what they do, not only as a vocalist, but as a songwriter as well. And I wrote this list of like 14 people, and I asked 14 people, and every single one said yes. Apart from one, I won't tell you, but every single one said yes, and which blew my mind. Alan Vega, Jesus Christ, I got an email from Alan Vega saying, I used to be a big fan of the Soup Dragons. I've just been sat up all night listening to your records. It's like, who knew? Until you reach out to these people and they tell you things, you know. Fred Schneider, you know, became good friends through that. And but David was an amazing story, because David, we'd never met. And I booked a studio in Brixton, where he lives, to record a vocal. And we decided to meet like half an hour before in a coffee shop. And we just instantly clicked. We went round, we did the vocal, we finished the track, and then we just started hanging out with each other like friends. He kept coming to, like, when I DJ'd at clubs, and he said to me, I do this thing, but I don't really, you know, I do this kind of thing that I love doing just because I love doing it. But I play in a jazz club in South London, but I do like, I'll do a whole night of Prince songs with a jazz band, or a whole night of, you know, Bowie songs with a jazz band. And that's the point that blew my mind, because I started going to all of them. I've seen them do everybody. I started going to everyone, and it was just like, I just saw this whole world of David McAlmont that people didn't know, and a fun side as well, because I think people think David's like super serious. He's not super serious. He's super fun, and I just saw these crazy things that I just thought, oh my God, I just so want to work with this guy. This is who I want to make music with. And I phoned him up, and I said, he came round to my place, and we wrote a song. This is before I said about the album. We wrote this song because of a kind of conversation that when we were having a drink, we got a bit tipsy, and we had this kind of heated conversation about Prince, about how I said, like, to write songs like Prince, you have to be a producer. You have to know the production before you write the song. And I believe a lot of Prince songs, he had the production in his head before he wrote the song. And he's like, he didn't get it. He goes, prove it. And I said, okay, I'll write a song that sounds like Prince, just based on production. So I wrote this track, like literally in like 30 minutes, and David sang in it. And we ended up having this brilliant track. And then a few days later, it came round and we ended up doing another track just for fun. And then I realised we had 2 tracks, and I phoned him up and said, David, do you know we've got 2 tracks? He's like, yes. I said, well, what do you think about making more tracks? And we made an album. And he went, yeah, I'll have a think about it. Phone me tomorrow. But he tells me now that he knew straight away he was going to say yes, but he was just playing around. And the next morning, I phoned him to apologise. I was like, listen, I'm really sorry. I backed you in a corner. I said, he's like, shut the fuck up. Of course I want to make an album. And yeah, we've made the first album coming out in February, and we're all ready. Like last week he was here, and we've already nearly finished the second album. And the first one isn't even out yet. You know, that's how much we're enjoying it. We're doing it for ourselves. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like, of course we want to make records that people like, but I've never felt like I was 18 again, where it's just about, this is for us. Purely this is for us. This is for us to get our rocks off on. And if anything happens to it, amazing, but yeah.
I mean, the songs that I've heard, yeah, no, totally, because the songs that I've heard also, they feel very filmic. I know you mentioned Bacharach and the swirling strings and things like that, which is obviously a part of the influence that would make that. But they have this sort of filmic quality to it. Obviously, you're connected through music. What do you think he has contributed to you musically, and what do you feel that you have given him?
Wish he was sitting here right now. That's a big question. I think he has said to me that working with me, I kind of give him an open. Yeah, I'm very like, I make something and we just take it whatever way it goes. I'm pretty easy going in that way. It's not about like, right, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. Never ever told David he's got to do something or anything, it's completely, I trust him 100% implicitly to do the best that he wants to do. And I think he trusts me to do the best too. And I think it's the first time I've had somebody that gives me confidence. And I think I give him confidence too. Which is weird, because I've never been in a situation of being in a duo. This is the weird thing as well. Suddenly you wake up and you realise, oh my God, we're a duo. We spoke about that when we were doing photographs. It's like, oh my God, we're a duo. It's like, he's been in, I suppose he has been a duo before with Bernard, but I've never been in that situation. I've been in bands, or I've been myself. So suddenly I'm in a duo, and it's great, because I think over the few years we've been working together now, he can read me and I can read him without having to ask. I know straight away if I do something that David's going to like, I just like, yeah, he's going to love this. And then there's things that I do where I push the envelope to see if he does. So that's that way of like guiding things to try and work out. But to be honest, we make more music than we'll ever release. We just constantly make stuff that just falls to the side. I mean, that album that's coming out, Happy Ending, we must have recorded about 23 tracks. And it's got 12 tracks on it, but we just kept going and going and recording, because the concept was we sat at my kitchen table one day and said, right, this is what we do. We get to the point where each of us fight for the 12 tracks in the album, and when we know there's 12 tracks that we're fighting for, that's when we know we've got a good album. So we always kind of just kept recording, going, right, no, that one's 100% not coming off. Then he'd do that with another track, and I'd be like, no. So it'd be like, when we both agreed 100% on the track, it got on the album. So that's how we did it.
I want to finish with a period of yours in New York, because I did an interview not long ago with Man Parish, and Man Parrish talked about that era in New York, and Michael Ailig, and also what happened around that time. He actually mentioned that he picked up Michael Ailig when he came out of prison and went on a 2-hour car journey around New York just to hear the story. And the story, you should hear that because it's fucking amazing. What was that period in your life for you, and why do you think that may have been an important period?
That New York, when it was kind of like we were staying on and off in America, but there was a period where I was just based in New York for a long time, and there was a period where we had our own place, and it was kind of weird because, you know, the 88 to 90, 88, 89, 90 being in the UK during the whole rave thing, but then going to America and seeing it all starting there as well. So it was kind of like, it was like a year or so behind, but it was a completely different, much more hardcore version in New York. You know, it was like, there was a lot of drugs and there was a lot, I mean, I went to a few of Michael's parties, and the one I always remember was Club USA. So basically, he did the parties in the Limelight, and then Club USA, obviously, some huge super club thought we want this promoter, so they gave him a club. So he built like a fairground slide coming from the top balcony down to the bottom dance floor, and it was just people completely. Because it was just all ketamine. It was kind of weird because in the UK it was all ecstasy fueled, but in New York it was just ketamine. And it was just people like, it's funny because the character in the Party Monster movie, which is Marilyn Manson, you know, the big crazy, that I think she was in the elevator taking you up and down the floors of this club, because it was the only way to get up to the different dance floors was to go in this elevator or go down the fairground ride. And I decided, like, I ain't going on that. So I remember getting in this elevator with this where she was just pressing random buttons because she was so off her face. The doors just kept opening at the same floor and things. And we were all just like, why do you go up to number 4? And we were like, open number 2, number 4, like trying to press buttons, like. That was kind of I used to go to, I don't know, there was a club in New York called Save the Robots, which was like an after-hours party, and that was pretty mad. I mean, I think that opened my head up to the whole DJ side of things as well. I think I kind of associate those years, I mean, in New York, going to Jackie 60s in the meatpacking district. I mean, to be honest, Divine Thing video is a complete and utter picture of that whole period for me, and I'm really proud of that video because we got nominated for an MTV award for a video that was actually had trans characters on it well before. I mean, it was getting played on daytime TV right across America, Bible Belt, you name it, and there was a lot of kind of trans superstars from that New York scene in the video, and it was very kind of the best thing was Iggy Pop says it was his favorite video of that year on MTV, and that was just like, well, you know, that was the best thing that ever happened to me around that time. And then getting nominated for an MTV award was kind of weird because the first thing we asked was, do you find out if you win? And they're like, no. I always thought that when people go to award shows, they know beforehand. But guess what? They don't. You don't have a clue. So we had to do the whole thing of going all the way to LA and sitting for like through a 4-hour MTV award show because our nomination was right at the end as best alternative video. And the nomination had 4 nominations. It was Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and us. Just like, what? You know, it's just the most insane period. That whole New York years were amazing times.
Yeah, well, Iggy Pop's always had good taste, so I think that's a good place to end. I really think you've had an amazing life because it's been so diverse and also has a happy ending, you know, which is very important. So,
and guess what the next album's called? It's funny because somebody else said that. Somebody said, "Is it called Happy Ending?" Because I did an interview, kind of similar, a podcast, and the guy went, "Is that why you called your album Happy Ending?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, did people think that?" It's like, we called it a happy ending because when you see the artwork and the whole feel of the album is euphoric and melancholic, and for some reason the term happy ending I think fits that euphoria and sadness, so
yeah, well, I think
is.
you've had that in your life as well. So,
yes, yeah,
and
so does everybody. Everybody has periods of euphoria and sadness, and I think when you've reached those, when you get, actually maybe not so many people have had the extremes like you said as well, like yourself, but I think when people have had those extremes of euphoria, being nominated for an MTV award and Iggy Pop saying you're great, and then sadness, you're stuck in a mental health institute and you can't get out. It's, if you haven't tasted those both extremes, you're not going to be able to not take for granted the things that you shouldn't take for granted, or never take anything for granted now.
Yeah, beautifully said. And thank God for Yaz. So thanks very much, Sean. That was great.
Thank you.
I loved talking to you. It was brilliant.
Okay. Keep in touch.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.